So, good evening, everybody. My name is Bessie Speers, and it is an honor to welcome you to Women of Wilmington. And I want to thank Kristen Mumford and our entire alumni and advancement team for helping to organize this evening. I thought just to start, I would, for those of you who just joined, this helps to set some context around women in leadership, the pay gap, women in politics, women in STEM fields, science and technology, engineering, and math. And you can see these figures and graphs speak for themselves. We've made great progress, and we want to continue to make great progress. And I couldn't be prouder to be heading a school that's 101 years old, has been co-ed for that entire time, and really takes seriously the education and intellect of both boys and girls, men and women. And I truly believe that our communities are stronger, our world is stronger when we share leadership and recognize the strengths that both men and women can bring to so many fields. So first of all, I'd like to welcome our board chair, Dr. Eric Johnson, who is joining us and wants to just say a couple words. And he is a great champion of Tower Hill, and certainly of our great Tower Talks and the panel that we have tonight.
I think this evening and the contents are going to speak for themselves. I'm keeping my comments to a minimum. I'm just very proud to be part of this school, and very, very, very proud of the people who've made and continue to make this school what it is. And that includes you, Bessie, and our I'll say our guest speakers, but they're not our guests, they're our pillars, because they not only continue to stand with and for Tower Hill and work for it, but they are both products and builders of what we are. So I'm very excited about this program, and again, just proud to be a part of this process.
Well said, Dr. Johnson. Thank you, and for your leadership and support of all things Tower Hill. Before I see if our student body president is on the Zoom, if she is, she's a very busy president. I want you to know that Nicole Crivelli is a female president of the Tower Hill School. The student government is headed by Nicole, and she's been a great leader. And if she's on the line, I'd love her just to offer a couple words about her experience as president, a female president of Tower Hill's SGA. And Nicole, if you're not, do we see Nicole anywhere? If not, she can chime in later. It's been a big, before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I will just share some context just to bring you a little closer to campus for those zooming in from different places. And by the way, thank you for sharing this evening with Tower Hill. It really means a lot to us, and we know that you are busy. So it's been a big day at Tower Hill. We started with 400 grandparents zooming in from all over the world, from India, from the UK, from Tennessee, Illinois, all over, 400 grandparents, and we're bookending the day with this wonderful event as well. And in between, the varsity tennis teams both were victorious, and it also happens to be the beginning of National Poetry Month here in April, and how wonderful it was to have Amanda Gorman as the inaugural poet earlier in January. Women's History Month was technically in March, but April 1st, we're sneaking it in. And if I get to share my druthers, I think that all these months should be full with with examples and the leadership of women and girls, as well as many other people with incredible talent. So we at some point will progress so that we don't divide things into months, but we're sneaking this in just to kind of say how committed we are to leadership and to promoting girls and women in STEM and many other fields where they're sorely needed. So at this point, Nicole, do we see Nicole? I don't want to skip by her if she is on. Nicole Corbelli. All right. Well, at this point, what I'd love to do is to have each of our panelists who are just true Tower Hill in so many ways and have each one been incredibly supportive of our mission, both past and present in so many different ways. It would take me all evening to share with you how strongly I feel and how much I respect each one of these women who have joined us. But each person is going to introduce themselves. We've given you a little flavor for their connections. Ellen Kullman is here with us and is going to share with you a little bit about her path and connection to Tower Hill before we get started.
Great, thanks, Bessie. So it shows you there when I graduated from Tower Hill and then Tufts University. And I went to work in sales engineering for both Westinghouse Electric and then General Electric, but really felt I missed a business background. So I went at night to get my MBA at Northwestern. And from there, worked at GE a few years, ended up at DuPont in the early 80s, spent 27 years there, landing in the last 7 as CEO and chair of DuPont. And then I retired in 2015 and flunked retirement a few years later. And currently, I am the president and CEO of a startup in Silicon Valley. The name of the company is Carbon. It's 3D printing, polymeric 3D printing. And it kind of brings together my love of materials, of engineering, of just really a tremendous group of people and team we have there. And it's a lot of fun. I've stayed connected to Tower Hill, having been in Delaware for the last 35 years. And my 3 children graduated from Tower Hill. So I've really benefited greatly from being there. They taught me how to actually write, which was something that with my math and science interests, I wasn't really keen on. And that certainly has served me well throughout my career.
Thanks, Ellen. And next, we're fortunate to have Genelle Trader, who is also a trustee at Tower Hill. Ellen Kullman was a trustee as well and vice president of the board, and Genelle is a current trustee.
Thank you. Glad to be here. First, you know, I guess I didn't realize Ellen went to Tufts also. So I went to Tufts University. I was a bachelor's. I received a bachelor's in mathematics. I loved math and I loved computer science. And what I did was, when I graduated in '70, I actually went to work before I went back and got my master's in management. I worked at a couple of companies, just following my interest in technical. I was in the technical field. I was actually a software developer for one company, and then for another company, I was in technical sales as a systems engineer. So when I decided again that if I was really going to move ahead in business, I had to go back and get a business degree. So I went to MIT, the Sloan School of Management, and after leaving MIT, and again, I just wanted to harp on something Ellen said about writing. I remember being in the business school, and there was this big drive to get us all to write because they said we couldn't write. They said business students, most of us couldn't write. But they thought I could write a little bit. I was, and I owe that to Tower Hill. But after leaving Tower Hill, I worked at a few companies like IBM and Wang, and I was pursuing things like product. I really got this interested in product management, you know, marketing, products, bringing them to market. So I worked there. Then I worked at, then I went to the West Coast. Worked for a couple of small companies. One of them was AST Research, which I really loved. Very, very interesting company. Founded by three guys, Albert, Safi, and Tom. We used to call them, the three chipmunks, Alvin, Theodore, and Simon. So, but they were fun, and it was a fun company to work for. But then I got wooed away to Sun Microsystems. That's where I spent 10 years in product management, product marketing. I ended up heading up the workstation products group. So I was there. That was the last place I worked, in a corporation before I left, moved back east, and ended up becoming an executive coach. And that's another story.
Thanks, Genelle. And Michelle Shepard, who is a former board chair and parent of a graduate and current parent of Ella, is going to tell you.
Thank you,
about
Bessie.
that.
I think a great deal of my career is happenstance. I graduated with a degree in English literature, and I was getting ready to move to New York City to be a junior editor at Harper's Bazaar magazine, just what I wanted to do. But I had met my now husband our senior year in college, and he was moving back to Canada. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to maintain a long distance relationship on $12,000 a year. That was the salary, $12,000 a year. So right after graduation, I went back to a company that I had worked for every summer while I was in college, MBNA, credit card company that the locals will certainly know. And because I need to earn money to repay my student loans. And really, the rest is history. Right when I started, the bank was very accommodating and placed me in the in-house advertising agency so I could write, which I really enjoyed doing. And they had offered me a position in the management development program because I resisted that for months. Because I always thought, no little girl says, I want to grow up and be a banker. I mean, it just wasn't something that I had thought of for myself. But one day I woke up and realized it was really about who you were working with and how you felt about the company. And I had always loved my time working at MBNA every summer, and it was clearly the right decision. I spent my entire career there until my daughter started first grade, mostly in marketing and human resources. I worked both in the US and in the UK. I think I had something like 20 different jobs, so tremendous opportunity. When MBNA was acquired by Bank of America, I left the credit card business and went to run Bank of America's branch network in the east of the US, about 2,500 branches, which I loved doing. But I had always told myself that when my daughter starts first grade, I am going to stop working full time. And I did that. I said I was going to stop, which was heartbreaking and elating at the same time. I took a year to sort of find myself. And since then, that was 12 years ago, I've had my own consulting practice in financial services.
Thanks, Michelle, Ellen, and Genelle. And we are really going to dive into what I hope will be a robust conversation, talking honestly about the rewards, the challenges, because we're joined by a number of upper school students as well as parents, alums, and friends of Tower Hill. And it is really a terrific opportunity for us to just hear the insights and wisdom and to hear the good parts and the hard parts. And I truly wish that I had had a panel like this when I was in high school. So we're going to get into that in short order. And I do hear that we have a president, President Crivelli, on the line here. And if Nicole, if you are here, unmute yourself and just welcome everybody, and maybe share a little bit about what your leadership has been like of the student body here at Tower Hill. And then we'll get into some real great dialogue with our panelists. Nicole, are you here? There, I see her. All right. Well, Nicole is being elusive, which perhaps is a leadership trait that we need to embrace right now. No, Nicole is fabulous, and we will hear her voice at some point because I know she's really interested in all of this. Let's start with the obvious. This pandemic has certainly changed all of our lives, impacted the workplace, the home. And I'm just curious, what impact do you think the pandemic has had, particularly on women, and their lives, their careers, the home? And Genelle, I'm just curious what you think about that, and then we can see where that takes us. And Ellen and Michelle, please feel free to jump in. But Genelle, what are your thoughts?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm a coach, and it's so interesting because now I used to meet people in their offices, so it was just at work. Now I am, I'm meeting people in their homes where they work and they live their other life, they live their home life. So it's just so interesting how it's all merged for so many of them now. And it's been stressful because it's a struggle, especially if you have small kids, and your house cleaner can't come to the house anymore because of quarantine. So you got to keep the house clean, and you're working. So yeah, I see people really struggling, and they're complaining about, some of the women leaders I work with complain about lack of sleep. They're not being able to focus like they want to because of the challenges of the work, and everything else they have to juggle. And so I've seen some real challenges with women leaders. But at the same time, I've also seen some amazing resilience, and some of them taking advantage of opportunities. Once they get through the hard part initially, they are taking advantage of some opportunities. The couple have gotten laid off, and they're starting businesses, consulting businesses, because the money's not coming in. I've also seen some say, okay, and especially this is African-American leaders, they're basically saying, how can this is hard, but what can I do to help others in the organization who are younger, who are, people of color, and I know what they're going through. So they're looking at those opportunities of building better community with other people or other women like them, to help them through it. So I'm seeing them exert a lot of positive impact too. So it's both. It's just amazing what I'm actually seeing. And so it's good to see. Good to see.
I would just add, I think that there's going to be lasting impacts. I mean, when you think just about sort of August and September, when this school year started, more than 1 million adults left the workforce, and more than 800,000 of them were women. And obviously there's a lot of reasons, the service industries were hardest hit. You've got the gender wage gap, which made it smarter to make the female stay home. And of course, remote learning, but that's not going to correct itself without us taking some serious action.
I think there's also been a real cry for more flexibility in work once we migrate towards a new normal. I don't think it's going to go back the way it was, but there's been positives about remote work in terms of just being able to have no time commuting. But there's been negatives, like there's no hard line between work and home. So how do people manage that? I mean, my little company, we've had to make it really clear, flexible work, practices. If you can't take any calls between, say, 11:30 and 1:30, because you got to feed 3 kids that are on 3 different Zoom schedules, then just block that time on your calendar and you'll get your work done elsewhere. Or at other times. And so I think there's going to be a real need to reevaluate where and how work gets done going forward based on what we've learned coming through this past year.
Yeah, thank you. Those are great insights, and certainly a theme that we can return to here. And I encourage all of our attendees to think of questions that you may have for our panelists, and feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try to wend our way through them. You know, mentorship. I often think that that those of us in leadership positions have had the good fortune of good mentors, and I'm just curious. You know, Ellen, have you had a mentor and in your incredible career path, and you know, what are your thoughts on the importance of mentorship?
You know, I think mentors are critically important, and sponsors as well. And I'll talk about that. My first mentor was Ed Hughes at Tower Hill.
Oh my God.
And he's the one that convinced me that with my math and science background, I should go into engineering.
Wow.
And go to a school that also has a liberal arts school in case you want to major in math or something else like that. I mean, he was tremendous at helping me find the confidence, right, to you know, apply to these programs. I've had mentors, I mean, you know, bosses of mine, you know, and I had two at DuPont that were tremendous at helping me develop, at really helping me, being very non-judgmental, but helping me understand my behavior, my, you know, creating self-awareness in me in terms of my impact on people and what I did well and what I needed to develop. At the same time, these two individuals also sponsored me. And the difference between mentorship and sponsorship is mentorship's about development. Sponsorship is about being in the room where decisions are made of people and saying, I think she can do the job, or this is what she'll bring to it. Men tend to have natural sponsors. Women don't, in my experience. And I found that true at DuPont. And so, and its sponsorship is really important because it really helps create a level playing field. You know, when you're considering a slate, right, for a new job that has both men and women on it, to really have people in the room who can speak to their capabilities. But I have benefited greatly from sponsorship, and hence, as I've gotten higher in, you know, and more experienced, I've sponsored young people, men and women, in their careers, to really, you know, kind of help them have the benefit of maybe learning from my mistakes and learning from the things that I didn't do so well earlier in my career.
That's a great way to put it, sponsorship. I love that. I have not thought of it that way, but because I think that I've had far more sponsors than mentors, I think. And the other thing I would observe is that most of the people who supported me and advocated me over the years, there were far more men than women. So, you know, women often ask, well, do I have to have a female mentor? No, absolutely. I don't think so. I mean, I think that there's a lot to learn from that, but you know, whoever is going to advocate for you is you should work with that person. So it's a good way to put, I'm going to use that at Ellen's sponsorship.
And we had a question, you know, in the chat. Laura asked, how do you get a sponsor? And it's a really good question. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually encourage the people I work with, some of the leaders, to identify someone they admire and go up and basically, you know, build a relationship with them, and ask them, will they be a mentor? Or if they're at the right level, will they be their sponsor? And it has worked most of the time. And the reason why I ask them is because I can tell you, I work with a lot of Black leaders, and they're not, it's harder for them to get the sponsorship that they seek sometimes. It's because the people at the top, most of the people at the top who can advocate for you are white males, and they naturally think of people that look like them to sponsor. So basically, I have asked them, well, why don't you go up and ask that? Is there someone you admire in the organization? You've watched them and you admire how they lead and how they talk to people. And they've got one person I can think of. She went up and asked him. She basically said, you know, I really liked your talk. I like what you said. And I was wondering if I could come meet with you. And during a few meetings, she actually came out and asked what he meant to her. And over time, she asked would he sponsor her for something she was looking for. And it worked. So
Yeah.
sometimes you just have to ask.
Right, be
Yeah.
direct.
Yeah.
And a good question, Andrea Glowatz asks, really to Ellen, do you find that women tend to have female sponsors? Is there any correlation between gender and sponsorship?
No, actually, all of my sponsors were men, because there weren't many women above me when I was coming through, and that is probably more of my age thing than anything else. But I don't think it's about gender. I think it's about creating a relationship. I mean, to get a sponsor, it's really easy for a mentor to become a sponsor because they know you and they know your strengths and they know who you are, right? The genuine you. And so I always tended to start with with the mentor. In the fact that they sponsored me, I didn't even know about till after the fact. Till, actually in the case of the one that happened when I was younger, till years later, right? When that came to light. And it was just very special to know that we had that kind of relationship, that they would be willing to take us, to take a swing at getting, me into other and positions where that was a stretch for me.
I think an effective mentoring relationship is not about having coffee once a month. I have found, both as a mentor and a mentee, that I've gotten the most value when I have somebody that I can call with a real situation that I'm dealing with, and to talk through what I'm thinking about, what I'm struggling, and to sort of share in that way. Make it real and use those people to sort of allow them to sort of get into your head, and you can get into their head. And I think it makes for a much deeper relationship.
Yeah, and I just would say that Ellen, Michelle, and Genelle have all served in that role for me when I've picked up the phone and said, here's what I got going on. Can you just hear me think out loud? What are your thoughts? What have you? And just to have an ear, an astute, objective ear, someone who knows you and understands your context is so important. So I really thank each of you for serving in that role for me as a leader. What are, obviously there are stereotypes, there are challenges, there's sexism. What are stereotypes and challenges that you have experienced as women leaders in your field? And maybe Michelle, can you kind of lead us off on that, and would love to hear from everybody on this.
Yeah. So, I went into banking, which was certainly a male dominated field. And again, we're talking sort of 20 and 30 years ago. And for me, I think the combination of youth and gender at that time was very, very challenging. I was blessed to work at a company that was willing to give me lots of great opportunities, but that often put me in a room where I was the only woman and the youngest person. And that's a rough combination. There were the small things, like I was always the one that was expected to take notes. I never got anybody coffee, but always the one to expect to take notes. And the big things, I had the NFL as a client, 15 or 20 years ago. That was not a welcome place for women. Lunch meetings in London always started with a martini, which was something I did not want to do. Financial conferences that you would go to, again, there were very few women presenters, and following your presentation, there'd be individual meetings with analyst investors that were conducted in their hotel rooms, like you'd be perched on the edge of the bed talking about your business, which is just, so I don't know if there's so much stereotypes, but there were insensitivities to, how it felt to be a young woman in those situations. I suspect that many of those things don't happen anymore. I'm pretty sure. But while there were, challenges, I also recognized advantages of being, sometimes being the only in a room, and the opportunity to really offer a different point of view. I wasn't expected necessarily to think about like everybody else around the table. And that was a great opportunity. I mean, sometimes it was dangerous. My point of view was way out there, but more often than not, it was, again, just a tremendous opportunity. So I think that, there have been stereotypes about women's capabilities and their priorities, but also, being the only or being one of the few can be used to your advantage.
Other thoughts?
Yeah,
Or
yeah. I, because I'm in two different groups, most often I was the only, but I felt so alone sometime, like I felt like I didn't belong to the group. And I don't know, I've been in in my past, I have sat in meetings where I felt because quite often, especially in Sun Microsystems, I was the only female in the room. And quite often it was so obvious that the guys were all talking to each other. They weren't even looking at me sometimes. They really didn't look at me till I got, to a certain position. And I spoke up loud. I know so many of you are familiar with, I think it's Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In. And I'll tell you, with a lot, I leaned in so much because I wanted to be heard that I was exhausted. I burnt out. I knocked myself out because it was so hard just to be heard and feel a part of. Now, it wasn't at all organizations. Now, I found that the smaller organizations, it was a little easier. I don't know, it was maybe because the founders were different. But I found as some Fortune 500 companies, the bigger they get, the more homogenous they get. And it doesn't make sense, but that's what I saw at Sun Microsystems. And the more homogenous they get, the harder it gets, the more lonely you feel. I did have a mentor, and she, an African-American woman who was one of the few presidents of an organization back in Silicon Valley, who often would tell me she felt so lonely sitting in the room. And I said, yeah, I can relate to that. So that to me was one of the biggest things that stands out. There were never any real outright, slights or anything like that. It's just, I don't know. I think part of the problem was I wasn't part of their informal networks.
Yeah.
And that really makes a difference. But I didn't know about them and I wasn't invited to them. So it was very, very hard. So figuring out how to, relate after work or become part of those networks would be very, very important. And it does get a little easier if there's other women, in the group. So
great insights. Thanks, Genelle. Ellen, you probably have lots of stories to tell on this front.
Oh, as I say, there were so many macroaggressions. I couldn't deal with the microaggressions. They didn't matter because they were the macro ones that you had to deal with. But, and so, I get it. It's uncomfortable. I'm the only one. And so what do I need to do, right? I need to make them more comfortable. And I try to do that, not by trying to be like them, but by, kind of like getting one off the herd, right? Or two off the herd and having lunch with them and getting to know them on an individual basis or in a small group. And they could see me as a person. As when you get in those big group meetings, it's just really hard, right? Because they don't trust you, you look different, why, where you're coming from. And so I think the importance of establishing relationships helps battle those stereotypes. And some of them had no interest, right? And you say, okay, forget them and move on, right? I didn't take it personally because I figured they were a jerk to everybody, right? So not just to me. And so, but I worked it. I tried, and you're right, you feel very lonely, right? And because there is, but at night I'd come home and we didn't have a dog, I didn't have a dog to kick, but I talked to Michael about it, like my husband, and And he was always a good listener. He never tried to fix things, but it always made me feel, what I mean, like, right, get a good night's sleep, go back in there for another day kind of thing.
Yeah, I think there are lots of micro things that I kind of remember over and even as simple as, certainly not when I was interviewing for Tower Hill headship, but in other instances, I think women often get asked, questions that are illegal. How many kids do you have? How old are they? How can you do this job and take care of kids and this kind of thing? So, little things that stack up. But like Ellen says, I think, the challenge is how you navigate around it to be able then to lead forward and not get distracted by it. We do have a question that I think is a really great one, but from Louise. Thanks, Louise. It's great to see you. Can you speak about a time that you ever took time off or away from work for personal reasons or family, and then how it was transitioning back into the working world? And also, can you speak about the importance of perhaps lateral moves and moves to learn something new versus moves to be promoted? And I can offer, after our second child, I thought, okay, maybe I can work part-time for a school. And I did do that, Louise, but I was a really bad part-time worker and I ended up, just working full-time. So it was kind of a diminishing returns, but I remember having great worries about, doing that because somehow it would affect my overall career path and what have you. But, I admire women who are able to figure out what's right in the moment for family reasons or for your own professional reasons or personal reasons. And I wish I could have been better at it because I think people write the script all different ways. But I'd love to hear from Ellen or Michelle or Genelle on this.
Yeah, no, back in my day, I mean, you took 6 weeks off when you had a child, maybe 8 weeks with twins, and then, it was back to work. But I never took appreciable time off other than when I had my children. But I did have women that worked for me that did take appreciable time off because of a family situation, having to care for elderly parents. They needed 6 months. And I felt what we talked through is that we would talk every week or every other week, that we would stay connected. And that was really important to these women to feel like they had a line back at the company so that when they came back, it wasn't like jumping into a pool of cold water, that they kind of knew changes that were coming or what projects were on or going. And they say, well, if I'm back in December, what, am I going back to my job? And it's like, yeah, but you might want to take on this project. So it wasn't that it was a long conversation, 15, 20 minutes, but I think if you're going to take time off and you're, taking a leave of absence from a company, as opposed to just quitting and doing, kind of your own thing, I think finding some ways to stay connected, at a very low level helps, right? Helps keep you, in their mindset, right? As an employee who's valued and is coming back.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. As Ellen said, so people would take off 6 to 8 weeks when they had a baby. For both my children, I said, I'm taking 5 months. I had both my babies in April. I said, I'm coming back in September. And first there was this whole, well, she's never coming back. If she's going to be gone 5 months, she's never coming back. So, the chess pieces start to get moved and there's a certain sense of vulnerability you feel, right? But, I worked it out where I had somebody sit in my desk chair at the office, get me things every week. I mean, obviously I didn't do a ton of work, but I kept my hand in it. And, I even traveled a little bit. They said, can you go here or here? I said, yeah, but I'm taking my baby with me. So it worked, but I totally agree. Staying connected in some way, even if it's a minimal way, will make you feel better and will make your employer feel better.
Yeah. And I think, I see that with maternity leave, even here at school is, I'm talking with a, incoming administrator who just had her second child. And, she had the child 3 weeks ago and her brain is so into Tower Hill right now. And she's excited to, and we don't stop thinking, or our brains don't turn off after we have a baby. We all know that. So it's actually kind of good to have that mindset. Thank you. That's great. There was another question. Do you, from Rochella, great to see you. Thanks for asking this. Do you advise women to begin their network establishment earlier in their high school days versus waiting until college?
I don't advise them at all. I mean, I think naturally relationships happen and networks are formed, maybe at a younger age now even, but it always makes me a little sad when kids in high school have to feel like they're mini professionals rather than sort of just living in the moment and soaking up all the great things that happen in high school and college. And that may be naive and that may be outdated, but I don't really talk to women or anybody about those types of networks until after they're in a job or getting their first job.
And Michelle has a great vantage point. She does a lot of alumni work for Georgetown and talks to prospective students and current Georgetown students. So you got a big love heart from our Dean of Teaching and Learning, Andrea Glowatz, on your answer there. So I want to ask you all for your insights about leadership qualities. What qualities are most important and in your experience, and what think of your own leadership strengths, and just share with us what you think about those qualities. Genelle, you're an executive coach and you're thinking about this all the time.
Yeah. Well, I want to tell a little story first. When I went to the Sloan School, there was some leadership classes, emotional intelligence and how to get others to follow you and all those kind of things. And we used to call all the students, we used to call those fluffy studies. And we didn't pay much attention to them. And then 10 years later, when we came back for a reunion, every person said, boy, I wish I paid attention to fluffy studies. Because, the hardest part of their jobs are leading people, managing people. So, don't miss out on that opportunity to learn about to take those kind of topics seriously. So I think for me, and especially when I look at what's happening now, what's really important for leadership is, transparency and openness, being very credible, doing what you say you're going to do. That's just so important. And listening, especially now with all the, diversity and inclusion stuff, you got to listen to people, listen to different perspectives, and acknowledge that you heard people. So these are some of the qualities that I think, are very important. Of course, over and over again, when I talk to leaders, they complain about, gosh, I don't think my people heard me, or I don't think I'm communicating well. And a lot of it's just, you got to communicate often, especially about the future and where you're trying to go, and make sure people understand and bought into that future. Whenever you see someone that you talk to in the hall or stop by their office and say, hey, what are you doing to support our future? That's a good conversation. It makes sure people understand where we're all going. So all of those things I think are very, very important. The fluffy stuff is important. So just to summarize.
I think for me, just to add to what Genelle said, and I had to learn this, it's self-awareness. So you have to understand the impact you have on the team, on your coworkers, on your whatever, right? And so we're all distracted. It's a distracted world. But when you're in that next meeting, they don't care what happened in the last meeting or that you had a bad last meeting. What they care about is, are you going to contribute to this one? And so you got to be able to clear your head and be self-aware enough to to be, to be in the moment and to be engaged, right? As opposed to, it's easy on Zoom, it's easy to get distracted, right? I've got people who are like multitasking, doing email while I'm having a meeting with them. I'm like saying, okay, guys, come on, and I think so. And I chalk that up to self-awareness, that you're understanding what you need to do, what you need to be in the moment to get the best out of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I would echo. I think authenticity, being who you are, being true to yourself, your head, your heart, your backbone, that's, I think, really important. And I also think humility, because as you sort of ascend in your career and your span of control gets larger and larger, you're going to be in many jobs where you do not know as much about the technical aspects of that business as the people who are working for you. So you have to have humility and be, a lifelong learner, and, constantly ask questions and respect the people whose efforts you're managing.
Well, these are just golden words. I'm so glad we're recording this, and I want all of our students to hear pieces of this. Hillary asked a great question, that's related to kind of what we're talking about, leadership qualities that you all feel are really critical. Any thoughts on management style and whether women's skills or tendencies, like being more cooperative, less competitive, more empathetic, maybe the fluffy stuff, Genelle, are they truly appreciated these days, or is it just talk but not really truly happening yet in reality from your vantage points?
In my experience, back in when I started working, command and control was kind of the way things were done. And it was interesting, but in today's day and age, that doesn't work. So it's not about the what you have to do, it's about the how. And a more collaborative, a more sensing, a more bringing people together, how is, just empowering, so I'm like the oldest person in my company, little carbon, 400 people. I would say 350 of them have not seen their 35th birthday. And so it's a little different than DuPont. And they are very into the feeling they need to be included. They need to that, and that gives them their energy. And so I do think that these facilitative, collaborative skills are really important from a leadership standpoint. But it's not about what has to be done, it's about how. And that's where I think, and I'm a big believer that people who naturally possess that, and I do believe more women possess that, are at an advantage with where companies, leadership, things are going in this day and age.
Yeah. Pardon me, my clock is ringing in the background here, but I do want to ask Michelle, just since we're, we titled this Women of Wilmington. Michelle, you just had such great experience with Bank of America and MBNA and those organizations had an impact on Wilmington. What are your hopes for Wilmington specifically, in regards to the impact women can have in Wilmington?
I'm worried about sort of three things relative to Wilmington, and I'm sure it's no different than many other cities like ours. The first is what we talked about earlier about supporting women as they attempt to re-enter the workforce post-COVID. I think that's a big concern. I think the other thing that I think is really revealed itself is the educational and economic impact on children, particularly children of color during this period. And then the other thing is, the mental health of teens. And all three of those are big problems, big challenges. I think with all of them, we need programming, we need volunteers, we need training. We all have to sort of participate. I think of, there were specific, as a matter of fact, there's like a bunch of women from the Tower Hill community that know this space so much better than I do and have done so much more. Louise and Andrea and Regina Hall, I don't think she's on the call, but all these people are literally working day in and day out in our community to make these things better. And I think women are uniquely positioned because we're connectors, we're networkers. We're, some of these solutions to these problems are not that complicated. When we think about kids that have been disadvantaged through this, we need tutoring programs, and we need summer-based catch-up programs, and we need probably educational enhancements to camp. They're all things that we can do, that we can bring together, as you say, Bessie, all the time, our time, talent, and treasure, and to serve those. So I think that what I would ask of, the women on this call or the men on this call is, have a willingness to look outward. I learned that from Andrea, and to connect with people like the smart women working at Strive or HERC, or the great work being done at the Delaware YMCA, to see how you can play some role in trying to alleviate those three issues in Wilmington in the short term.
Wonderful. And Tower Hill benefits from, again, the leaders on this call, a number of whom, Michelle, you rightly named, and others, and we want to lean in and be part of that conversation. So we welcome any and all creative ideas and ways in which we can pay it forward and be really engaged. And I love how, Brian Stevenson talks about proximity and proximity. We are so lucky to be in a town and in a school community that is proximate to all of this in a way that we can have an impact. You did, Michelle, so eloquently mention the really unusual nature of the time we're living in with the pandemic, and the extra burden and challenges for women who, for whatever reasons, have either opted to stay at home. Wendy, who's we claim as a terrific alum, and asks a really eloquent question in the chat about, just the sensitivity towards having that gap if you choose to be at home and need to be at home for COVID related, reasons. How do we help each other? How do we help women overcome that stigma that employers may still have about a gap, in a career? And what are your thoughts and advice on that? Anyone, Genelle, you want to take a crack at that?
Sure.
Wendy, I don't know if I got the spirit of your question. It was a terrific question, and I want to make sure you chime in if I didn't get it right.
You did. Thank you so much, Bessie. That was wonderful. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. It's wonderful to see everyone. Yeah, I've stepped away deliberately to care for family. My dad passed away shortly after my daughter was born. And so I took a few years off, and then that was compounded. I was actually planning to go back to work, and then COVID happened. So then I've got like one more year. So it's a 4-year gap, which I think is substantial. And I've been in management roles. Ellen, we could talk sometime. I'm a Tufts alum also. So Genelle, Ellen, hi, thanks. Fortuitous there. So, but I was just generally wondering how to discuss not a 10-year gap, but an under 5-year, but not a 6-month gap. And I have not stayed in touch. I've not been plugged in as formally, because it was not a natural fit to do so, because I did step away. I resigned intentionally from the role, but would love to get back in. And I'm anticipating a lot of pushback and questioning, et cetera, of my commitment to work if I've had somewhat of a gap. So thank you so much for your thoughts.
Oh, sure. I can't even think of the name of the program, but there are programs that help women get back to work. I mean, there was a couple of ladies, I don't know if Michelle or Ellen, the name of the group, that actually, they had programs, they work with organizations, Fortune 500 companies, to bring women back to work who had to take some time off. And as much as 5-6 years they've taken off. And a lot of, companies are always looking for good talent. And so, these programs, they're always open to talking to talented women and bringing them back into the workplace. Because let me tell you, there really is, things are changing so fast, as you can see. There really is this demand for talent for the future, and, and building those pipelines. And I'll tell you, I think just getting your resume, preparing that, getting your story prepared, maybe hooking up with one of these organizations. I have to get back to you. Maybe I can get back to you on the name of the organization. I can't say the name.
I know, I can't either, but I know what you're talking about.
That
Yeah.
organization. Yeah, they're very active. And just me, applying for certain jobs and telling them your story. If you have experience in that area and you've kept up with what's happening in the industry and, some of the skills, how it's changing and what your thoughts are on it, I think it's worth going for. I would not shy away from going, trying to move forward, get those jobs just because you have, 5 years off or whatever.
I would also add,
Huh? Go ahead, Michelle.
I would just also add, paid work is not the only work that has value.
Exactly.
So think about what you've been doing. And that's I think about all I learned in my tenure on the Tower Hill board. That was a great learning and professional experience, even though it was very different than my real job. So really think about what you've been doing and what you've been learning, how you spend your time. And I think that stuff belongs on a resume.
And I would just,
But we'll think of the name and get it to you.
yeah, I'll just add, Wendy, don't apologize for it. Don't try to explain too much, own it. And I think that because it's real and and you continue to develop through that time, to Michelle's point about really thinking that through.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was intentional, and I've done a lot of estate settlement, estate law, trust management, investment. There's been a ton of wealth management stuff to settle my father's estate, and it's taken multiple years to do it effectively. So I'll own it and talk to that. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Nice to see everyone.
Ellen, one thing that while we have you, Ellen did a wonderful segment on 60 Minutes. I don't know if any of you've seen it, on pay equity. And I just think, let's talk directly about that before we wrap up in the next 5 or 6 minutes. Can you talk about the concept of kind of the paradigm for parity that you have really been an advocate of?
And believe me, I spent years trying to avoid 60 Minutes, but this was a good interview because I was on the positive side of it. But no, so when I retired, a group of women got together in business, in academics, and talked about the issues associated with women of color, the lack of advancement, the pay disequity. I had an experience where my own daughter was facing some of the same challenges about being included that I faced in the 80s. She was still facing in the 2010s. And that made me angry enough to actually do something about it. And I joined forces and co-founded Paradigm for Parity. We're working with 130 companies. Bank of America is one of them. Walmart's one of them, small companies, and sharing learnings and action plans for getting more women into senior leadership positions, moving the pipeline forward, and really create, because it's something that companies learn and make mistakes, and creating an environment where they can share it. Because pay equity is only going to come when we get more women in higher position jobs, higher paid jobs, and then pulling, others along with us. So I've been working at it since 2015. It's gone so quickly, and it's really a labor of love to talk about the fact that most companies struggle with it and they need help, and sometimes embarrassed to ask for it. And so creating a safe place for them to talk about it with their peers has been really absolutely tremendous.
Well, bravo. We're just so proud and grateful to you for taking a stand there. I also feel like it's really important to be direct about the time in which we're living. And Genelle, what are some of the particular challenges for women of color, and how do we better support women of color in our respective fields?
Well, I can tell you what's going on now there, and it's pretty devastating. Well, first of all, they're losing, more women of color are losing their jobs.
Right.
And then those who have jobs at the entry level, they're not being promoted. So the pipeline's not filling up. I mean, the numbers are devastating. So, you know, one of the reasons they're losing jobs is because the industries that were impacted the most by COVID, you know, that you had more people of color. That's obvious. But when you look at even these organizations where women, you have women of color, they're not being promoted out of entry-level positions. You know, I think the best way to help them, well, I believe in mentorship. I believe in helping them have the right conversations they need to have with their managers, understanding what they need to do to build better networks in the organization. And those are the kind of things that I do, and with, you know, in the organization that I do some work with, that we all do. We believe in mentorship and reaching back and helping these ladies. But it is pretty, I mean, the numbers are unbelievably, I mean, we're not even filling the pipeline is what I'm basically saying. Right now, you do see a couple of, you know, for so long, we didn't even have an African-American woman as a CEO. Now there are a couple more. I think there are two I've heard of recently, Walgreens and TIAA. But other than that, that's it. They're just not even getting to, you know, management positions. So just keeping that in mind. Mentoring is a big thing. Just even, I mean, right now things are so difficult. I say because so many people I work with who are not people of color will say to me, what can I do? What can I do? And, you know, start a conversation. You know, I always tell them, just say, how are you doing? And if there's no response, just say, I really want to know how you're doing. Because people want to feel that you care and that you see them, and you probably see that they're having, you know, that things are probably more difficult for them than normal. So just reach out to people, you know, that's and talking to them. And you know, I think that would be so important. So important.
And Genelle, you were, I don't know that everyone knows this, but Genelle, you were the first female African-American student at Tower Hill.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. When I came in ninth grade, and I was the first, and I do remember the experience. But what made it easy, there were a couple of people who reached out to me and said, I just remember one student said, you'll be okay. We'll be okay. We'll get through this. And I'm saying, she said, we will be okay. She was, you know, and that made me feel good. And, you know, there were a couple of teachers that checked in on me, and actually Ed Hughes, I think someone mentioned Ed Hughes. He was one of those. And he encouraged me to look when, you know, I guess there was a history project that everyone had to do on a topic of their choice. And he encouraged me to do something around African-American history. And I really appreciated that. So yeah, the experience at Tower Hill was challenging. You know, I didn't have any friends, well, outside of Tower Hill. I never went to anyone's home, and they never came to my house, that kind of thing. So I never socialized outside of school, but you know, I had a big family, so I was okay. But yeah, it was challenging, but there were people who helped me get through. Definitely.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, you know, we are just beyond the hour. The conversation has been just so robust. I didn't want to cut it off right at the hour, but I do want to respect everyone's time. But here's what I would say. You know, we have a network right here on these 2 pages on this screen, and I would just urge us to continue these conversations. And if there's something that piqued interest, or you think, gosh, we really need to work on this, we need to get Genelle and some of us in the room and think about how do we help African-American women in the Wilmington community, or how do we help in other ways one another. And so I would say, let's just have this be the beginning of a continued conversation that we can broaden out in lots of ways. But it really has been inspiring to me personally. I am just humbled to be able to work alongside just great colleagues here on the screen. I see a number, as well as great trustees and board leaders in Genelle and Michelle and Ellen. And we just are so fortunate to have you three in our community. You are pillars. I love that. That Dr. Johnson used that term. And, thank you for helping us to really hone in on some themes. Humility and confidence, that combination, the intersection of confidence and humility is so critical. And I'm always trying to help the kids understand that as well. But thanks, Michelle, for that. Self-awareness, Ellen, really, I think, drove home quite eloquently how it is so important to be self-aware and always to be growing and learning and asking questions about how we as women and leaders come across to those that we work with. And mentoring and sponsorship, really the difference between those and the need for women to actively seek out sponsors. These are all really rich themes, and we could, talk about each one of them for much, much longer. Any other final thoughts or questions that are going to keep people up at night if we don't pose them right now, or any other thoughts from our panelists to kind of wrap us up?
No, just thank you for the opportunity. It's good to see everybody.
Well, it's great to be with everybody, and thank you everybody for sharing your time. Thank you, Kristen Mumford and team, for putting this together, and really a round of applause, especially to Ellen and Michelle and Genelle, who are really busy professionals and moms and spouses and trustees and board members in the community. So so many roles you play, and we just are really honored to have you with us this evening. So thank you. Everyone have a great evening, and happy National Poetry Month, and let's make every month Women's History Month as well, and go forward really supporting one another. I believe actually that our boys are better off knowing that there are strong women leaders, and that it all merges together in wonderful ways for our community. So let's keep up the good conversation, and thank you. Have a great evening.
Great, thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
Ellen, Michelle, and Genelle.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, ladies.
The birds.
Thank you.
Thank